Hi, and welcome to the Bouncing Back podcast. I'm your host, Melissa McCurley. And after my own battle with autoimmune disease, I created this podcast to share strategies, tools, and inspiring stories with other professionals who are navigating life and business with chronic illness. Please join our Facebook community at Bouncing Back Podcast, where we continue this conversation. I'm so excited to introduce to you our guest today, Sam Halliwell. She has an amazing journey and experience with endometriosis that led her to becoming an endometriosis coach, where she shares her knowledge and wisdom, and she's founded a method called the Embodied Alchemy Method, helping women transform their lives who are living with endometriosis. Sam, can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey, how that showed up for you in your life and what that looked like?
Of course, yes. So I was diagnosed with endometriosis in my early 20s, but looking back, I probably suffered from it right from my very first menses, to be honest. And started with chronic pain, not understanding what was happening every single month. Went to various doctors who suggested all sorts of things, and as is fairly typical, unfortunately, with this disease, the gaslighting and the misinformation started pretty much from the beginning. I was told it was IBS, then I was told I was making it all up, then I was told it might be an appendicitis, so they removed my appendix and they were like, oh, it's actually fine. Then they finally found endo. I was actually one of the lucky ones in that it was found from my first mention of the pain to the diagnosis was only about 3 years, which
Okay.
actually is quite low considering the
Yeah.
averages out there, which is mad to think that 3 years is lucky, right? So I finally found a surgeon who would operate and found the endo and was given a name for this strange thing that was happening. And then immediately, pretty much within 6 months, the pain came back again. And
Mhm.
going back to that same gynecologist and him saying, can't be endo then, definitely must be in your head. And there must be something else wrong with you, and it must all be psychological because are you trying to say I didn't get it all?
Good grief.
And it became a bit of an ego off, which was quite challenging. I was in my early 20s and I had no knowledge really of what was happening to be able to do anything about it. So I had several years back and forth, different gynecologists trying to find out what to do about this thing, several operations. I had fertility struggles then with at the beginning, huge challenges to conceive my first child, and pretty much got to the point where I thought, well, this is it. This thing is now controlling my life. I was a professional accountant. I was going into work absolutely doubled up in pain, unable to barely do my job, literally sitting hunched over my desk trying to work on far too many painkillers than I should have been, considering I was driving to and from work. I mean, when I look back, it makes me cringe that what I was doing just to
Um,
survive, quite frankly. And there came a turning point where there were two things that sort of happened coincidentally at the same sort of time. I happened to be reading a book. I'd already researched, I thought, everything about this disease. I'm a bit of a geek at heart and also quite stubborn. So being told that there was nothing that can be done about this disease was kind of not something that was sitting well with me. It's just not
wasn't in
my
your wheelhouse.
personality. No, it's not in my personality to just be told no, quite frankly. So I'd been researching everything. I'd tried, I thought, every possible option out there and happened to come across a particular book that talked about eating foods at a particular time in your cycle. So different foods
Hmm.
depending on where you were in your cycle. And I was having a little bit of success with that. I was noticing the pain was easing a little bit. And at the same time, I happened to go to a personal self-development retreat. No intention of it being anything to do with my endo at all. It was just something I was interested in, doing my own self-development and my own mental health. And at this particular retreat, it had been 4 days after one of my many laparoscopies. I
Hmm.
shouldn't have gone to a retreat, quite frankly. I should have been in bed, but I mentioned the stubborn bit already, so I went anyway because that's me. And this was a 2-day retreat. The first day, the Friday, I was not even human. Couldn't stand, couldn't join in any of the things we were supposed to be doing. I was counting down the seconds until I could have the next hit of some sort of painkillers that I was on, just trying to get through the day, quite frankly. And in the evening, there was a dynamic meditation. And I don't know if you've ever done a dynamic meditation
No,
before.
what is that for? I don't know one for people in the audience. What is?
So when you think of meditation, you think very much of the eyes closed, go on a journey, in that kind of, that's the traditional thing that comes to mind. But with an active meditation, hence the name, it's constantly moving. So with a practitioner, they will take you through moving non-stop for about 60 to 90 minutes to music, quite loud. And it's very big, bold movements. So and I've been to one before. There's people crying and screaming into pillows, there's thumping the floor, there's hands in the air, like it's big, bold
Wow.
actions.
Okay.
And it's all about moving stuff that's stuck in
Stuck
one's body.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know
And
that
that's
was what it
the
was called. Very
yeah,
cool.
it
Dynamic
is.
meditation. Okay.
Absolutely. And it's an incredible thing to do if you ever get the chance to do it. I so recommend it. But of course, being 4 days post-surgery, I could barely sit down, let alone jump up and down and scream and all these stomp and all these things that these women around me were able to do. And so very simply, I sat in a chair and pretty much that was about as much as I could manage movement, just a little movement side to side. And I realized quite quickly, well, I'm clearly going to get nothing from this thing then. The whole point is to move energy and I can barely move an inch here. This is just going to be a disaster. And then I kind of had this weird, almost like a out of body visual moment where I imagined seeing myself from across the room. And I
Hmm.
realized in this particular room, in this particular environment, I was the odd one out. And that I looked so strange compared to the rest of the room who had big, bold movements, and there's me barely an inch. And for whatever reason, it made me laugh. And I mean, like proper hysterical, crying, belly laugh, not sure if you'll ever stop laugh, that kind of
The
one.
best kinds of laugh. Yeah, with your whole soul.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must have done that for about an hour. The next day, went to bed that day thinking, oh, well, at least I got something out of it, bit of fun, right? Bit of a laugh. The next day, I woke up and felt like a completely new woman.
Wow.
I'd ditched the crutches. I'd practically skipped down to breakfast. Like, I felt like I could have climbed Everest. Like, I was so pumped up and full of energy, and I couldn't feel the pain. And I was really ecstatic, but also really confused. Like, what on earth is going on here? And I even remember one of the other participants like not quite believing me when I shared that I'd had an operation a few days prior. They were like, "No way, that's not physically possible." So that day was great and I had an amazing experience. As I got home, I really got my curiosity into gear, and I was like, "What on earth happened? Like, why was it that laughing hysterically, and that's the only thing I'd done different, seemed to have changed how this pain was showing up for me?" And that was the kind of spark that started there's got to be something else that can deal with this pain. There's got to be something else that can be helping this disease. And realistically, that was probably the start of this journey for me, that doing the endo coaching. I mean, there was plenty of years between that and actually forming a methodology and bringing it out to the world and everything. But certainly that was the starting point because it got me down the rabbit hole of how things that are stuck emotionally, mentally, trauma, all of those sort of things getting stuck in our body can create and flare up things like endometriosis.
And so we're going to circle back to the energy moving on this and where you are. But for people who are not familiar with endometriosis, can
Of
you
course.
just kind of give us the highlight of what it is and what that means for somebody and their body and what they're going through, and
Mhm.
perhaps maybe some of the common treatments too?
Of course. So endometriosis is where cells that are similar to the lining of the womb end up somewhere else in the body. Usually the most common places are in other areas of our gynecological area, so it might be our ovaries, our tubes, things like that. Often the bowels get it on, and the bladder. So it tends to, most women stays in the same sort of area, but it
Okay.
can end up, I mean, it's been found in women's brains, it's been found in their
Really?
lungs, yeah,
I
all
did not
sorts of
know that.
places. And it means that when a woman then has her cycle each month, the hormone system is designed so that if a baby is not fertilized, the egg and the lining of our womb comes out, and that's our menses, right? When you have endometriosis and these cells that are similar to that lining of the womb are somewhere else, those hormones are also trying to pull on those same cells that are elsewhere. It is trying to create the expulsion of those cells, but they're stuck. They are physically
Mm.
stuck because they're not in a place that's designed to actually leave our bodies, right?
So the cells want to shed, but the whatever they're attached to, the lung, the brain, the bladder is kind of like, what are you doing?
Yeah, not supposed to be here.
Okay.
And it
Wow.
causes huge amounts of pain, usually. Not
Okay.
always. I mean, there's a one of the challenges of endometriosis is the checklist of symptoms doesn't apply to every single woman, but a large part of them will have pain because your body parts are trying to pull something that in a
Mm,
place that shouldn't have something pulled.
correct.
It can cause high rates of infertility. Again, because these cells cause a lot of scar tissue, and especially if it causes it on the ovaries and the tubes and any part of our system designed to have babies, then it causes issues with that. So infertility is really high, and women who don't experience pain, they first tend to find it when they're trying for a child and can't.
Okay.
But it can have a whole host of symptoms. Those are the two ones that everybody hears about, but it can be all sorts of things from the endo itself, but also from the ways that we're trying to deal with it. Because you mentioned what are the common treatments for it, and there aren't many, and what is out there doesn't provide a long-term cure. There is no such thing as a cure for this disease as yet. I'd love in my lifetime for that to be changing. That's one thing I'd love to see, but at the moment there is no cure. It tends to be a mixture of opioids and other drugs to deal with the pain.
Okay.
There's lots of tests that they try, MRIs and things like that, but they don't tend to show the disease. Laparoscopy is the common one, and then there's two types of laparoscopy surgery. There's the gold standard one, the excision surgery, which does have a large difference and has a longer time before the endo comes back, but it's very rarely performed because it involves much higher skilled surgeon, and also it takes longer, so it's not as lucrative for surgeons to do it.
Are they
So
removing
they,
those cells? Is that what they're doing? They're going and removing?
yes,
Okay.
so the
Okay.
excision is taking it out by the root, if you imagine it like that. That's the
Mm,
gold standard one. And then you have ablation, which just burns the cells away, which is the most common laparoscopy performed and requires less skill level on the surgeon, but
okay.
has a much higher rate of recurrence and creates its own scar tissue as well, which then just
Builds.
exacerbates the problem.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And you get to a point where you have so many of them, and then they say, well, if you're done having kids, then we'll just whip everything out, have a hysterectomy. There are lots of doctors who claim that then cures it. It doesn't, unfortunately. It can for some women, absolutely, but certainly not for everyone by any stretch of the imagination. And
Okay.
other than that, and tablets and the other hormone changing things like birth control methods, things like that, that tends to be then the ongoing maintenance that a doctor will give someone to try and suppress a woman's
Gotcha.
menses, right? And that's what is available to women generally.
So it's
And a
definitely
lot
a
of,
management type situation.
absolutely, yes. And for
Yeah.
some women, that management is good enough that they are fine with it, which is amazing, you know. Unfortunately, there's plenty of us that's just not the case and still left with huge amounts of pain and difficulties with not much options out there.
To do. So you had this transformative experience with your
Mhm.
laughing. No doubt you went and researched after
Yeah,
that what
yeah.
happened. And then in your work, I know you connect trauma, you connect the nervous system regulation with healing. Can you go into that piece? I
Mm.
think because I think that's probably applicable for everybody with certainly autoimmune disease, chronic illnesses, however that's showing up for them. And this is kind of newer territory, you know? We're not hearing these conversations from doctors so
No,
much.
no, no.
I
You're
don't say it all,
absolutely
but
right.
not so much.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And it came about a lot through the research, and certainly started with experimenting myself, because why that's where you'd start, right? And
We're our own
then
guinea pigs. Yeah.
yeah, especially when it comes to this kind of work, because as you say, it's just not out there enough. And then with friends and family and things like that. So I that women's conditions aren't well researched out there at all. There's a huge disparity in the research and the science that's out there. There is some which shows that stress and trauma and other types of wounds do aggravate certain autoimmune diseases like endo, but the research is sparse. I'm very open to being part of research studies for that because I just think it's so needed to be getting it more out there. And there is, though, a fair amount of research on how things like stress and trauma affect the body. There is starting to get more and more as well. And it was a lot of that route that I ended up down and noticing by a lot of, I did like cycle tracking to the nth degree, like, not just tracking a cycle, which is what most women think of when they think of cycle tracking. They track when they're bleeding, and that's pretty much as they do. But I tracked everything, and I mean everything. And I noticed that the worst pain would follow higher stress events or certain conversations with people who I knew would trigger me. And that plus the research that I was looking at the time, which shows that how the stress and trauma gets stuck in our bodies, I was like, okay, there could be something here.
Yeah.
And that's where I started with the experimentation with the self-development stuff, tools that I was learning at the time. Tracking then as I was implementing this thing, how was it changing how my endo was showing up and then with other people? And more and more and more as I've gotten into this and where I am now bringing this to other women, that shows up so often. How trauma and any challenges that we have, especially a lot of childhood stuff, seems to get stuck for women in their womb area, in their gynecological area. A huge percentage of the clients I work with will have like mother wound challenges coming up, not exclusively, but that's quite common. And it makes sense, right? Because when we think of there are other stress and trauma related conditions that talk about the same sort of area, things like IBS, and that is also talked about as being related. And it makes sense because when we're in a higher frequency of fight flight responses, we are feeling smaller because of things that have happened to us and around us, our bodies will naturally go towards, and I'm exaggerating it now, but we will go to a more fetal position. We will tend to, as we're feeling that hormonal response, that cortisol response, our bodies are designed to try and protect us. They're designed to try and protect our more squidgy bits that are going to get hurt more, right? And that includes for women this area of our bodies. And so many times that then gets stuck. And so a huge part of my work is working with that, not just on the physical symptoms, it is on what has got stuck through these other things like trauma and etc.
Wow, that's amazing. One thing that I like you, I listen to neuroscience podcast. I just all the time I'm learning from all the different medical, integrative, holistic. And one thing to speak about the trauma at a young age that really made sense to me, and I forget who it was on. I think they were on the Huberman podcast, but that for children who grow up in a trauma environment, if you have an alcoholic parent, if you have parents that fight, maybe there was a divorce, that your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are setting, I think up until you're like 10. Yeah. And that if you have the need for that fight or flight and that protective, your parasympathetic literally sets higher than average baseline, so that your whole life, you never really in your reset, unless you do work, can get back to that healthy level where your body can do the healing and the recalibration. Is that something I thought it made so much sense when I heard it, and it was just the tip of the iceberg of this topic. That's really the extent of my knowledge, but even that nugget was like, okay, that makes so much sense, A, and B, I can see how everything dysregulates from there.
Absolutely. There's a huge part of the somatic work, especially that I do, is about activating that parasympathetic system and elongating it, because exactly what you said, that women who have gotten used to that having to stay constantly alert, even when they do access the parasympathetic, don't know and haven't learned how to stay there. And so much of the parasympathetic is all about the words, the relax, recharge, renew, all of these words that are about healing.
Right.
And if we're not in that because we're in sympathetic, constantly on alert, constantly in an environment that feels unsafe, and safety is such a huge thing of this, right? Yeah. If we're constantly thinking, and so much of it can be unconscious because it comes from our childhood, but essentially we're constantly on the alert for something that's going to cause us harm, our bodies are not able to heal. They just can't. If you go back to the point of the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, the sympathetic is supposed to be from a very biological hardline standpoint. If you go back to like the cavewoman times, it was the thing to kick off to give you some adrenaline to run away from the big woolly mammoth that's going to try and eat you, kind of thing. And
Right.
then you'd stop, you'd shake it off, which is a beautiful way to get into the parasympathetic. You see animals of prey doing this, they'll shake all over
Mhm.
when the threat has gone. And that's them resetting into their parasympathetic. And that's what it's supposed to do. It's a part of our body that's designed good. And in sympathetic, because it's about running away from that big woolly mammoth, our blood and our energy goes to the parts of our bodies that make us run, hence fight or flight. It goes to
Right.
our arms, it goes to our legs, it goes away from our other organs. The last thing you want if your village is under threat as a cave woman is to be pregnant. That is just not a good idea. And so we don't have the energy going to that area of our body. And of course, that then shows up in things like endo because our healing there, it's so our gynae area is so deprived of the energy and the support it needs if we're constantly ready to
It's
go.
always flowing to the arms and legs or the
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. So you touched on somatic practices. Can you expand on that? What are those? How do those work? How do you use them in your work?
A few different ways, really. So one of the ways is embodiment work. So I'll take women through usually a group class in this particular way, where we play certain songs and we move our bodies in a particular way to change and unlock where this stuff is stored. And it can be quite slow and simple, especially for women with endo, because they need that to help bring it down.
Right.
And it's a whole host of things. It can be designed to moving one particular part of our body, so in an isolation. It can be our whole body. It can be, which is then the more physical things. It can be a piece where it's working on a specific trauma. So we may bring up an anger piece and actually have
Mm.
an activation of righteous anger. Because if anger has gotten stored in our body and is something that we avoid, then teaching our bodies how to recognize righteous true anger from anger that's leaking because it actually comes from the past but is showing up in the present,
Mm.
and releasing that through a movement piece reprograms the cells in our body to be able to get to that more relaxed and gentle state. So that's in the specific embodiment classes, and sometimes they're longer classes, but I'll sometimes bring in a particular piece on a one-to-one client work. Depending on what they're showing up with, I'll stick a piece on, like, okay, right, let's go and do a breathing exercise, and it'll be breathing in a particular way. Because, so many women, and not just with endo, right? This is so common in our society right now. We end up with this, what I call head on stick
Oh,
syndrome.
what does that mean? I have a visual of what I think it means, but
Yeah.
tell me more.
We effectively are walking around cut off from our neck down,
Okay.
so unconnected with our bodies because we've been trained that's the way that we have to show up in this world. And what it means is that, and you can see how I invite you that when you're sit on a bench somewhere and just watch how women will walk, and you'll see exactly what I mean now. You'll be looking for it, and their arms and legs are technically moving while they're walking, but they may as well not be. It maybe looks quite robotic because there
Mm.
is just nothing happening below the neck. And it's because the disconnection has happened with our bodies. And
Okay.
actually, as women, we are curvy. We are designed to have what's called our synovial fluid, which is the particular fluid that connects our entire bodies. Think of it like the mycelium of mushrooms underneath the ground. We
Mm.
have something in our own bodies like that called this synovial fluid. And it has to move, to be able to work. And when we're walking around practically robotic, it isn't doing that. So some of
Mm.
the embodiment work is about finding that connection again to their whole bodies, recognizing that we do have something below the neck, and learning to access the wisdom that's within it. Because anything, especially like endo, that causes pain is our body's way of signaling that something's wrong.
Right.
And if we're unable to deal with it because it's a condition like endo where we're not given access to a tablet that can just make it go away, that so easily causes this head on stick, because understandably we're like, well, I just don't want to feel it anymore. And we push everything away, and we're practically going around going, la, 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 I'm not listening to our bodies. And of course, all that causes is more and more and more flare-ups, because it's like our bodies are going, I need to shout louder because you're not listening. And it gets to the point then when we're bedbound and struggling with it. So much of the embodiment work is about finding that connection, feeling into every part of us and what it means to us. And that's the first step of the methodology that I use, is that reconnection piece. And then some of the other somatic pieces I work on is a lot of the dealing with the trauma and the mental health side of things. So it'll be inner child healing. So I do a lot of deep meditation work and limiting belief releases, and looking into those, kind of digging into what are the things we're telling ourselves and have chose to believe that are keeping these emotions, feelings, meanings stuck in our bodies. And it's amazing how as soon as we hit on a phrase, and it'll come out in a client session, they'll say something, and all of a sudden they'll, like, usually that quite often will bring the floodgates open. You know, you've hit pay dirt, and they'll just suddenly take a breath and like, and everything comes out. And by bringing it out, talking it through, and reprogramming with the inner child, with the adult self, and with the ego all together to get onto a new way of believing, to change a belief from something disempowering to empowering. The amount of times I'll get a message the next day going, don't know what we did, because they're half in meditative
I was
state,
gonna say, do
right?
you have
So
an
they,
example? Can you give us, obviously not somebody's name,
yeah.
but can you give it like a kind of specific situation or emotion or body pain, how it shows?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So there was one of my clients recently, she was very much, she was feeling the pain, but it was also very much in a mental challenge at the time. She was quite depressed. She was really struggling. And we did this work on what was showing up for her, and there was a lot of stuff about not being good enough, and nobody cares about me. I'm all alone. Uh, these responses were showing up, and she wasn't consciously aware of most of them. And when we dug into them in the session, we looked back in through meditation. We went back to when those decisions were made, where they came from, and why they were important to her inner child. You know, her child took those beliefs on because she needed to be safe at the time. And in examining where it came from, we were able to look through the adult lens and go, yes, we understand why that happened then, and it's no longer serving us. And releasing that mentally also released physically. And the next day she's like, oh, I just feel so much better today. Like, I've gone outside, I've gone for a lovely walk today, and I'm talking to
Mm.
friends. I just feel so completely different. That was quite a recent client of mine that had that, and a transformation from somebody who had showed up and you could see she looked grey. You know, there was just no life in her eyes. You could see everything about her whole body was slumped over, and she was just fed up. And that's just one recent one. And there's loads of different tales of that, where something we believe gets stuck. And I can remember this from my own journey, which of course, as I say, is where a lot of this came from. I remember some of those biggest beliefs of mine that as soon as I shifted them, completely changed not just how I showed up in my energetic state, but did change the physical, which is just incredible, really.
And that's the alchemy part.
That's
I'm
the
guessing
alchemy part.
that's the
Yeah,
alchemy part.
absolutely.
You're
Because it
turning
looks like
sand into
magic.
gold, or
Yeah, exactly, because it looks like magic, and the amount of times, because the state that the clients are usually in when we're talking about this, it's kind of half meditative, like they go on a journey, and it looks like magic, because the next day they're like, it feels like everything's changed. I'm not quite sure what you did yesterday. And I have to go, it wasn't me, it was you. You know, you're the one who shifted, you're the one who changed, you're the one who allowed something in that up till now you've been not seeing and not paying attention to. And as soon as you're telling your inner child, I hear you, I'm here, I understand, m what looks like miracles can happen. And that's why the word alchemy absolutely is in there, because it looks from the outside like magic.
and it sounds like it can be that fast. We're so
Yeah,
programmed to this linear, like getting in shape. And it's weeks, and you just, okay, let's do this. We're prepping for the journey, but it sounds like it's magic. It's that fast.
it absolutely can be, yes, because it's we're carrying around, I think of it like, carrying around a bin bag of things that we're
Mhm.
holding on to. And if you hit on the right one, the whole bag spills open.
You just set it down. You just drop the bag.
You just drop the whole bag because the heaviest
Wow.
one is no longer in there. And not saying it's always as quick as like that, but certainly it absolutely can because everything's like layers, right? And if you hit the pay dirt on something, everything else can change. And simply just by the bag getting lighter, everything else can sometimes have that little bit less power.
Right.
And that's where a lot of what I work with as well is then after we open up that reconnection with the body, we look at not just the symptoms of what's underneath it, reclaiming our own identity, no longer defining ourselves as a woman with endometriosis. So many women at the start be like, they may as well say I am endometriosis the way they've
Right.
owned it. They've so embodied the disease of it. And actually it's like, no, no, let's find out who you are that isn't endo because it's something that you have symptoms of. It's not who you are.
You are. And that's hard, when you're living day in and day out with the disease, with pain, with flare-ups, you have to design your whole life around it. I mean, it it can start to feel like it is your life,
A
even if you don't
hundred
want
percent.
it to be, even if you're aware of that happening, just the realities of living with it. And like you said, it piles on, like one brick at a time. I love what you're doing. I think this is amazing and magical. And I think it's something that would be applicable for everybody. I know your target is endometriosis, but I think there's so much to be looked at and learned from people dealing with any kind of chronic illness. Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about your embodied alchemy method and
Yeah, of
just
course.
follow what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, and before I say that, actually, as well, yeah, endo is my particular thing because it's where my own journey came from. But I
Sure.
have had an increase in people coming to me lately with uh, all sorts of trauma-related stuff
Okay.
because the approach that I use works just the same.
Okay.
And so, yeah, absolutely. So my website is theendocoach.co.uk. So I am based in the UK, but I do all my work virtually. So anybody around the world. On Instagram, it's at Sam underscore the endo coach. And on Facebook, it is, and I'm going to forget this now, which is very silly of me.
And
Oh,
we're going to
yes,
link this in the show notes for people too, but I just for those of you driving, I
amazing.
want you to be able to hear.
Absolutely, yes. So on Facebook, it's Samantha Halliwell Coaching, and it shows up as Samantha Halliwell, the endometriosis coach. And as you say, yes, you're going to pop all the links very kindly in the show notes for me.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Sam. This is so wonderful. I think you're unlocking such an important piece of this. We spend so much time and energy going after the health, the medicine, the surgery, and you're right. It's like, I think this piece is so much, we're learning more and more every day, right? It's so much a part of the root cause. And until we go after that root, we're just cycling through procedures and meds. And that's not what any of us want, long
No,
term.
especially as women, because so much of the medicine-based system is based on a man's body and being very linear. And by definition, women are cyclical. How we are
Yes.
at one point in the month to how we are 14 days later, they have shown scientifically our entire body fundamentally changes on a cellular level. So how can something that works one point work the same 14 days later? Quite frankly, it cannot. And so
Right.
we have to have that whole holistic approach and honor that we are cyclical and own the advantages of that. There are so many advantages that we have because of that, and let it become a plus in our sheet rather than a negative.
Yeah, for sure. For people who don't know, and I'm sorry, I don't have the percentage in front of me. I don't remember, but I was startled to discover what percentage of medical research were based on male subjects. Do you kind of ballpark remember offhand? It's way more than 50%. I think it's over
Oh, it's
75%. I mean, it was staggering
really,
and it
really,
wasn't
really
even
high.
on every condition. I mean, it was just obviously testicular cancer, that would make sense, but it's just male subjects are typically hands down used like it's like over 90%. I don't want to misspeak, but it was shocking.
It is ridiculously high, even on conditions that are more prevalent in women, which is
Yes,
even more
bizarre.
yeah, it's just so hard to imagine. And there's, I mean, this is it's a subject that I could talk about for about 6 hours with you, my dear. It's because there's such a huge disparity. And
Yes.
how can it be then that something that applies in a study to men, and actually one of the reasons that the higher percentage is men, is because we are cyclical and we throw off the medicine studies. So
Okay.
when they're testing something new, they don't want women on those studies because our cycles mess with the results, and in
We aren't a constant.
means means we're not a constant. And rather than going, maybe this is a reason to actually focus on women then so that we can support them, they go, no, they're throwing off our results. Let's get rid of all them. Let's stick with men who we know just have that linear 24-hour cycle that's easier to predict, to understand, and to manage, and so we can extrapolate data from it better. Whereas those women, they throw off our results, so let's exclude them. And that's the main reasoning why. And yet
Wow.
should be the reason why we should have better research.
Yeah. This might be something else I can put on my list to advocate for.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we're coming up on time. I appreciate you so much. I can't thank you enough for shedding light on these topics and for opening the door for many, many people who aren't familiar with them, and they can go down and learn and reach out to you. It sounds like you're providing an incredible service method and a piece of healing for people. Thanks. Any parting words?
Thank you so much for having me today. And yes, absolutely. The biggest thing is to be, to be an advocate for those women in your life that have endometriosis and other these autoimmune conditions. Be a stand for them, be open for them, and be a part of the conversation, because that makes a huge difference when it's something where you're so unheard day to day. Being heard is actually a huge step towards healing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sam. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate you. Please do rate us, give us a review, and share our podcast. It helps us more than you could know. And I'll be back in 2 more weeks with more inspiring stories of success. So until then, keep bouncing back. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Bouncing Back podcast. Professionals thriving with chronic illness. I hope you found inspiration and actionable takeaways to support you on your journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement today. Remember, thriving with chronic illness is possible. You are stronger than you think. Until next time, take care and keep bouncing